I used to believe in fairy tales, not the ones with castles and dragons, but the kind where love felt safe. The kind where someone holds your hand through life's storms and never lets go. And for a while, Marcus made me believe I had found that. He had this way of looking at me, like I was the most precious thing in the world, the missing piece in his perfect love story. I let myself sink into it, into him. The warmth of his words, the way his fingers traced small circles on my back at night, it all felt so real. He wasn't just a man in love, he was a man who made love feel effortless, the kind of husband every woman dreams of. He listened, really listened, nodding at the right moments, eyes locked on mine like I was the only person who mattered. Flowers arrived at random, handwritten notes tucked between my books. "You're my heart," he'd say. "My future." And me? I never doubted it. How could I? Love, real love, didn't come with warnings. Our wedding was the kind that made people whisper, "They're perfect together," the kind where the laughter was genuine, the vows felt sacred, and the world outside seemed to pause just to witness our happiness. My mother cried during the ceremony, squeezing my hand in silent approval. The house we moved into felt like a dream, a fresh start, a promise made of brick and stone. I was finally home. But cracks have a way of hiding beneath the surface. Small, quiet things. The way he'd changed the subject when finances came up. The careful way he suggested putting both our names on the house, our accounts, our future. His mother, a polite, soft-spoken woman, never openly interfered, but I noticed the way her presence lingered, like a shadow in our marriage. At first, I ignored it. Love is about trust, isn't it? And trust means not questioning the things you don't want to see. Looking back, I wonder how I didn't see it sooner. The signs were there, subtle, quiet warnings whispering beneath the surface of our perfect life. I brushed them aside, convinced that love required faith, that doubt was the enemy of happiness. But doubt has a way of creeping in, slipping through the cracks when you least expect it. It started with the little things. Marcus would get oddly tense whenever I mentioned finances, like I was pulling at a thread he didn't want to unravel. "Don't stress about money, babe," he'd say with a smile. "What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine." A beautiful sentiment, right? Except it always felt a little rehearsed, like something he wanted me to believe without question. And then there were the documents, bills that mysteriously vanished, contracts that seemed to shift without my knowledge. I told myself it was nothing. I wanted to believe him. Then there was his mother. She was always there, hovering in the background of our marriage, like an unspoken force neither of us acknowledged. Marcus never said a bad word about her, never complained, never even hinted at tension. But there was something about their relationship that felt off. A devotion that went beyond the normal bonds of a mother and son. At first, I admired it. I thought it was sweet, the way he cared for her, the way he always made sure she had everything she needed. But soon I began to feel it, an invisible presence pressing against me, slowly pushing me out of the picture. I remember the first time I truly noticed it. We were sitting in the living room, a quiet evening, just the two of us. I had brought up a small investment opportunity, something for our future. Before I even finished my sentence, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and in that instant, I saw it. The slight flicker of tension in his jaw, the way his fingers clenched the phone just a little too tightly. Then he smiled, that same easy, effortless smile he always wore, and excused himself to take the call. "It's just business," I told myself. "Don't be paranoid." But paranoia wasn't the problem. The problem was that I wasn't paranoid enough. The first time I heard him whisper on the phone, I told myself it was nothing. A private conversation, maybe work-related, but it kept happening. Late at night, early in the morning, always in hushed tones. The moment I entered the room, the calls ended. "Just business," he'd say, with that same easy smile, slipping his phone back into his pocket like it was nothing. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. Then came the excuses. Little things at first. Forgotten receipts, missing account statements, explanations that didn't quite add up. I brushed them aside, convincing myself that marriage meant trust. But trust only works when it's real on both sides. I started noticing patterns. The way Marcus would guide conversations away from financial matters, how he'd distract me with affection, laughter, soft kisses against my temple. I mistook it for love. But now I know better. It wasn't love. It was control. And yet, despite the unease creeping into my gut, I stayed. I told myself I was overthinking, that love required patience, that doubts were the product of my own insecurities. After all, we were happy, weren't we? People envied us. We had the perfect house, the perfect life. So why did I feel like an outsider in my own marriage? It wasn't just Marcus. It was her, his mother. She never did anything outright, never said a single cruel word to me. But she didn't have to. She was always there, always watching, always just close enough to remind me that no matter what I thought, I was never really first in his life. I was just part of the plan, a necessary piece in a puzzle I hadn't even realized existed. But I see it now, and soon Marcus will see me too. Not as the woman he thought he could manipulate, not as the fool who would stand by and let him take everything. No, he will see me for what I truly am, the storm he never saw coming. Doubt is a slow poison. It seeps into your mind in whispers, in fleeting moments you try to dismiss. But once it takes hold, it spreads like wildfire. And for me, the moment it truly ignited was the night I found the missing bank statement. I wasn't looking for it. At least that's what I told myself. I had been tidying up, sorting through old paperwork when I noticed the gap. 1 month, completely unaccounted for. My stomach tightened as I checked again. And again. The numbers didn't lie. There were transactions I didn't recognize, money moving in ways it shouldn't have been, a withdrawal here, a transfer there. Small amounts at first, but enough to set off an alarm I could no longer ignore. I sat there, staring at the paper, my hands cold despite the heat of the room. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted there to be a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew. Marcus had been lying to me. Not just about the money, but about everything. That night, I watched him more closely. The way he carried himself, the way his fingers tapped against his glass at dinner. He was too comfortable, too sure of himself. He thought he had me exactly where he wanted, wrapped around his finger, blind to the truth. But he underestimated me. So I did what any smart woman would do. I stayed quiet. Silence became my weapon. I smiled when I needed to, laughed at his jokes, let him hold me at night. I played my part flawlessly, never letting on that I knew. But beneath the surface, I was unraveling the truth, one thread at a time. I started watching him. Really watching him, the way he guarded his phone like a lifeline, the way his voice dropped when he answered certain calls, the way his eyes flickered, just for a second, when I mentioned our accounts, our savings, our future. It was subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. And then, I found the emails. I hadn't meant to go through his laptop, but it was there, open on the kitchen counter. One unread message caught my eye, a subject line that sent a chill through me. Finalized divorce strategy. I hesitated, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to close it, to pretend I never saw it. But I couldn't. I clicked. And there it was, the truth, laid bare in black and white. A plan, a calculation. Marcus had never loved me. He had never intended for this marriage to last. From the very beginning, I had been a means to an end, a financial strategy. A woman to build a life with on paper, just long enough to take what he needed and walk away richer. And the worst part, it wasn't even for him. It was for her. His mother. My breath hitched as I scrolled through the emails, each line cutting deeper than the last. Detailed projections of our assets, timelines of when he planned to file, strategies to ensure I walked away with as little as possible. It was meticulous, calculated, cold. But what made my stomach turn wasn't just the betrayal, it was the reason behind it. Every mention of her felt like a slap to the face. Ensure my mother is comfortable. secure her financial future. Lisa will comply if I handle this correctly. He never wrote about love. Never about me. Just numbers, just strategy. Just the assurance that I would be a casualty in his carefully crafted plan. I closed the laptop and stared at my reflection in the darkened window. For years, I had been his wife. I had trusted him, built a life with him, and all this time, I had been nothing more than a transaction. The realization didn't just hurt, it ignited something deep inside me. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Rage. But rage without control is useless. If I wanted to destroy Marcus, I couldn't be reckless. I had to be patient, methodical. I had to do what he never saw coming. I had to become the woman he thought I wasn't. So I took a breath, smoothed out the wrinkles in my dress. And when Marcus walked into the room, smiling like he still had the upper hand, I smiled right back, because he had no idea what was coming for him. Rage alone wouldn't win this war. I needed precision. Every move had to be calculated, every step perfectly timed. Marcus thought he was in control, but the moment I saw those emails, the game changed. And now, I was the one writing the rules. The first thing I did was secure my assets. Quietly, methodically. I met with a financial advisor behind his back, transferring what I could, adjusting legal documents, ensuring that if he tried to take what was mine, he'd find himself grasping at air. I dug deeper, tracing every hidden account, every transaction he thought I wouldn't notice. And I didn't just protect myself, I made sure he was the one exposed. Next, I started gathering proof. Emails, bank statements, messages. I needed more than suspicion. I needed undeniable evidence. If he wanted a divorce that left me with nothing, I would give him one that left him in ruins. But I had to be careful. If Marcus even sensed what I was doing, he'd change his tactics. So I played my part. I let him believe I was still the doting wife, still blind to the betrayal lurking beneath our marriage. I kissed him goodbye in the mornings, cooked his favorite meals, laughed at his jokes, and all the while, I was setting the stage for his downfall. Because the best way to destroy a man like Marcus wasn't to fight him head-on, it was to let him walk straight into his own trap. The hardest part wasn't the planning, it was the patience. Every instinct in me screamed to confront him, to throw the evidence in his face and watch his mask shatter. But that would be too easy, too fast. Marcus had spent years weaving his lies, and I wanted him to feel every unraveling thread. So I started nudging him, subtly. Just enough to make him feel secure, to push him further into the illusion that everything was going according to his plan. I casually mentioned wanting to simplify our finances, giving him the perfect opportunity to push for more access. I let him think I was leaning on him more, trusting him more. And the more confident he became, the sloppier he got. He started leaving documents out, not realizing I was taking photos of every single one. He made calls in the next room, assuming I wasn't listening. He was so sure of his own brilliance, so sure of my blind devotion, that he never considered the possibility that I was 10 steps ahead. And then, the final piece fell into place. A meeting with his lawyer, one he had no idea I knew about. He had gone in to finalize his strategy, to set things in motion for the moment he would pull the rug out from under me. But what he didn't know was that I had already changed the entire landscape. Marcus wasn't walking into a victory. He was walking into his own destruction. I had spent weeks setting the stage, making sure every piece was exactly where it needed to be. Now, all that was left was to let Marcus make his move, and he did, right on schedule. One evening, he came home unusually cheerful, almost smug. He kissed my cheek, poured himself a drink, and leaned against the counter with the ease of a man who thought he had already won. I watched him sip his whiskey, knowing that inside that glass was a man about to lose everything. "We should talk," he said, casual but firm, "about the future." I nodded, keeping my expression soft, pliant. I had played this role so well that he still believed I was the naive wife who would nod along, who would listen and accept whatever he had to say. He didn't know that while he was busy plotting my downfall, I had been meticulously dismantling his foundation, brick by brick. He sat me down and started his well-rehearsed speech. Something about how these things happen, how people grow apart, how he still cared for me but wanted to be fair. Fair. The word almost made me laugh. He spoke like a man extending kindness, like he was doing me a favor, as if he wasn't about to gut me financially and walk away with everything he had set out to take. I let him finish. Let him bask in his delusion of control. And then I tilted my head, smiled, and slid a folder across the table. Before we move forward, I said gently, I think you should take a look at this. He frowned, glancing down at the folder. Inside were bank records, legal filings, copies of messages, evidence that he had been planning this betrayal from the beginning, and most importantly, proof that I had already outmaneuvered him. Every account he thought was under his control had been secured in my name. Every asset he planned to claim was legally locked away from his reach. And the fraudulent transfers he had made, thinking he could hide them? Well, let's just say the authorities would be very interested. I watched as the color drained from his face. His fingers trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages, his carefully constructed world crumbling with every turn. He looked up at me, eyes wide, searching for something. Panic, anger, fear. But I gave him nothing, because I had already won. For the first time since I met Marcus, he was speechless. His mouth opened, then closed. His fingers twitched against the folder, skimming over the evidence of his own downfall. I could see the calculations spinning behind his eyes, the desperate attempt to find an escape route, a loophole, a way to twist this in his favor. But there was none. I had made sure of that. He swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Lisa, this isn't what it looks like. His voice was calm, but I could hear the tremor beneath it. A man who had never been outplayed, now realizing he had walked straight into a trap. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. Really? I asked, tilting my head slightly. Because it looks like you've spent years planning to take everything from me. I let the words settle, let the weight of them press down on him like the walls of a room closing in. He exhaled sharply, shifting in his seat. It was never about taking from you, he tried again, grasping for anything that might salvage his control. I needed security. You have to understand. I laughed, a slow, quiet laugh, the kind that sends a chill down a person's spine. Understand? I repeated, leaning forward now, locking eyes with him. I understand perfectly, Marcus. I understand that every I love you was a script, that every future you painted for me was a carefully crafted illusion, that I was never your partner, I was your investment. His jaw clenched, his carefully curated mask slipping. I had never seen him without it before. Not like this, not exposed, not vulnerable. So tell me, I continued, my voice softer now, almost cruel in its gentleness. How does it feel, knowing you bet everything, and lost? Marcus looked like a man watching his world collapse in slow motion. His fingers clenched the edges of the folder, knuckles white, his entire body rigid. The silence stretched between us, thick, suffocating. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, the frantic search for a way out. But there was none. I had stripped him of every advantage, just like he had planned to do to me. Lisa, he tried again, voice lower now, a desperate softness creeping in. I made mistakes. I can admit that, but we don't have to do this. We can work something out. I almost laughed at the audacity. Even now, sitting across from me with his betrayal exposed, he still thought he could negotiate, still thought there was a version of this where he walked away intact. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. You don't get it, do you? I asked, watching the last vestiges of his arrogance drain away. This isn't about working something out. This is about consequences. You played the long game, Marcus, but so did I. His expression darkened, a flicker of anger beneath the panic. You think you've won? He snapped, his voice sharpening. You think this makes you better than me? I didn't flinch, didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, my voice quiet but unwavering. I don't need to be better than you. I held his gaze, let him see the steel beneath my calm. I just needed to make sure you never do this to anyone else. His breathing turned uneven. He knew. He knew I had shut every door, burned every bridge. He had nothing left to take, nowhere left to run. And the worst part? The person who had done this to him wasn't some enemy in the shadows. It was me, the woman he had underestimated. I watched him break in real time. The shift from rage to helplessness, the slow realization that the life he had carefully constructed was gone. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I felt something close to peace, because this was justice. Marcus sat there, breathing hard, his fingers twitching against the table like a man resisting the urge to flip it over. He was unraveling, his carefully controlled facade slipping piece by piece. I let the silence stretch between us, let him feel the weight of everything I had taken from him. Because that's what this was, a reckoning, a balancing of scales. He exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair, his frustration morphing into something colder. "You think you're untouchable now?" he muttered, voice edged with bitterness. "That I'll just walk away and let you ruin me?" I smiled, slow and deliberate. "You won't have a choice." I slid another envelope across the table, this one smaller but infinitely more damning. Inside were copies of his fraudulent transfers, his shady financial dealings, the evidence I had collected so meticulously. It was enough to ensure that if he even thought about retaliation, I had the power to bury him for good. His lips pressed into a thin line as he picked up the envelope, flipping through the pages. I could see the realization sinking in. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about survival. He had no leverage, no way to twist this to his advantage. He had spent years crafting a plan to destroy me, and now he was the one left with nothing. I leaned back, arms folded. "So here's what's going to happen," I said evenly. "You're going to walk away, quietly. You're not going to fight the divorce. You're not going to contest a damn thing. And in return, I'll let you keep whatever dignity you have left." His jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might shatter. "And if I don't?" I tilted my head slightly. "Then I make sure your mother knows exactly what kind of son she raised." That landed. His face paled, his entire body going still. Because for all his manipulation, for all his schemes, his mother was his Achilles heel. She had been the driving force behind this entire plan. And if she found out he had failed, not just failed, but lost everything, she would never forgive him. I stood up slowly, smoothing out my shirt, my heart steady, my mind clear. "Your move, Marcus." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The war was over, and I had won. The house felt different after Marcus left. Quieter, lighter. As if the walls themselves had been holding their breath, waiting for him to be gone. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the empty space where his presence used to loom, and for the first time in years, I exhaled without fear. I should have felt triumphant. And in some ways I did. I had taken back what was mine, unraveled the life he had so carefully constructed around his deception. He had walked away exactly as I planned, humiliated, powerless, with nothing to his name but regret. I imagined his mother's face when he told her the truth, how her disappointment would crush him more than anything I could have done. But there was something else. A quiet, lingering emptiness beneath the victory. Not sadness, not regret. Just a void. Because while I had won, I had also lost something along the way. Not love. I knew now that love had never truly existed between us. But the version of myself who had once believed in it so completely. I walked over to the mirror in the hallway, studying my own reflection. I looked the same, but I wasn't. The woman staring back at me wasn't the naive, trusting wife who once thought she had found her forever. She was someone else now. Stronger, wiser, but also harder. And maybe that was the price of survival. Days passed, then weeks. I expected some part of me to miss him, to miss the routine, the presence of another body in the house, the illusion of partnership. But I didn't. What I missed, if anything, was the woman I had been before him, the one who believed that love meant safety, that marriage was built on trust. That version of me was gone, and in her place stood someone who had learned the hard way that sometimes love is just another kind of war. I watched the fallout from a distance. Marcus tried to fight at first, reaching out under the pretense of wanting closure, of hoping we could part amicably. But I knew better. It wasn't closure he wanted, it was control. He was desperate to reclaim even the smallest shred of power. He tried guilt. He tried anger. He even tried pity. But I met each attempt with silence. He had no leverage left. Nothing I wanted. Nothing I feared. And then, just as quickly as he had inserted himself into my life all those years ago, he disappeared. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had left town, that his mother had all but disowned him after discovering the truth. The same woman he had sacrificed everything for had turned her back on him. I should have felt satisfaction in that, and maybe I did. But it was a quiet kind of justice, one that didn't require celebration, only acknowledgement. One night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the back porch, letting the cool air settle against my skin. I had spent so long preparing for war, for revenge, for the unraveling of everything he had built, that now, in the silence of my own victory, I wasn't sure what came next. But maybe that was the beauty of it. For the first time in years, my future was mine again. The morning after Marcus disappeared from my life for good, I stood by the window with my coffee, watching the world move on as if nothing had happened. And in a way, nothing had, at least not to anyone else. To them, I was just another woman going through a divorce, another life reshuffled, another story ending. But for me, this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. I no longer woke up feeling the weight of his lies pressing against my chest. No more questions, no more whispers in the dark. I was free. And not just from him. From the version of myself who would have accepted less, who would have ignored the warning signs, who would have let love blind her to the truth. That woman was gone. And the one who remained? She was someone I was still getting to know. I spent the next few weeks in quiet rebellion, small things, reclaiming the spaces he had occupied, the choices he had influenced. I repainted the bedroom a deep shade of green, a color he once said was too bold for a master suite. I took myself to dinner, ordering the expensive wine he used to say was a waste of money. I laughed too loudly with friends, let myself take up space in ways I hadn't in years. It was exhilarating, this act of returning to myself. And yet, there were moments, brief, fleeting, where I stood in the stillness of my empty house and wondered, had I really won? Or had I simply survived? Revenge had been the fuel that kept me going, but now that the fire had burned out, I wasn't sure what remained. But then, as I stepped outside into the crisp evening air, feeling the weight of my past finally lifting from my shoulders, I realized something. It didn't matter. I didn't need all the answers right now, because for the first time in years, I wasn't living in someone else's story. I was writing my own.